Okay, everyone, welcome to the second presentation of Tandy Assembly. Everyone having a good time? Where Sadie lives. Okay, for our second presentation, we have Arthur Gleckler, and his presentation is titled One Kid's Weird Journey into Software. At 13, after a year of writing programs on paper and mowing grass and shoveling snow to make money, he bought a TRS-80 Model I, Level 1 Basic TRS-80. He hasn't been able to stop programming since. While still a teenager, Arthur wrote the game Weerd on his cassette-only TRS-80 Model I. Then he had the great fortune of selling it through Big Five software. He's going to cover the technical, economic, legal, and emotional challenges of that journey, and the highs and lows of being a kid publishing software in the early 1980s. Arthur is betting that many people at Tandy Assembly will recognize parts of his story in their own experiences. So everyone, please welcome Arthur Gleckler.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me, and Pete and Mav, thank you for calling me out on TRS-80 Trash Talk, inviting me. I was very surprised to hear my name called out on the program and say, "Hey, come give a talk." So. And actually, just as I stepped up here, my laptop went off. Okay, there we go. Let me get everything running again. Note to self, turn off the screensaver before any kind of presentation. Okay, yeah, so I'm, like I said, like Pete said, I'm hoping that this will bring back memories for you guys too. So I wrote Weerd, which was the last TRS-80 Model 1/3 game that Big Five published, and kind of the only one that they went to someone outside to write. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is why is it called Weerd? And the answer to that question is I was 15 years old. I mean, actually, there's another reason, but that's pretty much it, I think. But let me give you a quick play of the beginning, just so you can see. Let's see. Hang on. Yeah, I should have called it One Weird Kid's Journey into Software. Anyway, this is another reason why it's called Weerd. So no one can argue that's not weird. I mean, it really, that's the way the game starts, and it doesn't get any less weird than that. So the TRS-80 was released in 1977, as we all know. And it was, I'm sure, at my local Radio Shack in Baltimore soon after that. But I was kind of unaware of it. But I did read somewhere in some magazine about this computer, the Cosmac Elf II. So it was also designed for hobbyists, but it has two 7-segment displays and a hex keypad, and that's it. And I thought, oh, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. I'm going to learn so much. And it's $99.95, and at the time I was making all the money that I could earn at pennies an hour shoveling snow and mowing lawns. So it was going to take a long time to do that. But I called my uncle, who at the time was an engineer at GM, at the advice of my parents, and he said, sorry, I'm jumping ahead here in the slides, forgive me. And he suggested that I'd be much happier if I actually waited and saved the much more money required to get a TRS-80 Model I, Level 1, 4K. And that was quite a big difference, right? $99.95 was already, it seemed like an infinite amount of money, and a TRS-80 Model I 4K was at $500 or $600 at the time. But I decided, okay, Uncle Virgil says I should do that. It has a screen and a real keyboard and a cassette tape player, which I would later learn was not a great thing. And I kept a record of every penny I earned. Literally, I would find a penny on the ground and put it in the little record and count down how much less I had to earn and before I finally got it. But eventually, I got my TRS-80 after spending way too much time looking at these catalogs and just imagining what it would be like. I'm sure you all have seen this catalog before. I found this on the internet somewhere. Someone was nice enough to... There's actually a website called RadioShackCatalogs.com. So apparently I wasn't the only one who really liked looking at the Radio Shack catalogs. So in the meantime, while I was trying to save up money for this thing, my friend Andrew and I were writing code on paper in junior high school whenever we would have a free moment, And we got this book, which I think some of you will recognize, right? The TRS-80 Model I manual. Unfortunately, I couldn't find, I don't have my copy anymore, and I couldn't find the insides, but many of you will remember it had these great cartoons that kind of explained how to write code and so on and so forth.
I think there's some in the room next door.
Are there really? I might bid on that, actually.
I have seen it online, the whole manual.
Really?
Yeah.
I know Ira Goldklang's site, the last I checked, said for copyright reasons he was only willing to put the cover on, so, but maybe someone else is more brave.
The color computer manuals are online.
Yeah,
I can't believe that's not.
yeah.
I did read that manual recently online, so I know it's somewhere.
Okay. So I will say, while I was saving up money, I used to go to the Radio Shack stores. You guys probably did that too. And I want to, if there's anyone here who is in any way attached to Radio Shack, I want to thank them because, I was just a young nerd who was very interested in this stuff, and I tried to be very polite and get out of the way when someone wanted to show off the computer, but they were so generous to let us play with these things, which were not cheap, right? I mean, they were affordable, but not cheap. And I would spend hours and hours and hours at the store writing code. So another thing you guys probably also remember is at the time, there were all these magazines out there that you could read that were, some of them like Creative Computing and Byte Magazine were more general. They were not just for one particular computer. But some of them like 80US, 80 Micro, particular editions of Softside Magazine, they were just for one computer, the TRS-80. And so soon after I started, soon after I finally saved up enough money to buy the TRS-80, my parents said, okay, you can go place the order at the store. We brought it home. I spent about a week coding, getting those paper programs that I'd never been able to test to actually run. And then I started sending my code into magazines. I should also mention these magazines, right, they would have code listings in them that you were expected to type in. You would type them in, and they were hundreds and hundreds of lines long, page after page after page. And you'd find that, well, it didn't work, and you'd have to learn by debugging. So I thought, I would send my, modest code into one or two of them and see what they would say. And sure enough, there was one that had a brilliant idea, one called C-Load Magazine, right, named after the command for loading from cassette. And I sent code in to them, and they actually said, yes, we would like to publish your code. So here's an example of a listing in a magazine. I'll explain this one later. So June 20th, 1979, I got an acceptance letter from C-Load Magazine for what they called my simulation linear equation solver. So I was in junior high school, right? I was doing algebra, so I wrote a program that would solve simultaneous linear equations, right? It was very straightforward. And for some reason, they decided to pay me $100 for that. And to me, that was just that was enough to buy a Cosmac Elf, right? I mean, that was a lot of money. So I got addicted to this idea that you could write code and someone could actually pay you for it. Later, I sent in another program so I had two in C-Load Magazine, and then Softside Magazine. I wrote a program. It was actually a library, you would call it today, that would pick a card from a deck of cards at random, but do it efficiently. Because I noticed a lot of the game programs at the time that were card games would be very fast at pulling the first few items from the deck, but as you got further and further down the deck of cards, they would get slower and slower. So it was an easy thing to make that faster. Anyway. Then in 80 US magazine, I wrote a trivial Caesar cipher and got that published. So I just want to say to all of you, if you ever have a chance to encourage a kid by kind of treating them like an adult, please do it. This was back in the days before the internet. So on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, right? That's the famous joke. Back then, no one knew you were a dog either, but it was done by post, right? I would actually write by hand my article or type it on an old typewriter, mail it into them, and since I didn't say I was 13 or 14 or whatever, they didn't know, and they would send me a thing saying, sign here and we'll send you $100, right? That kind of encouragement, even if you do it and you do know that they're a kid, is just unbelievably invaluable. And so anyway, encourage everyone around you, especially when they're younger. With the money I made with those games, with those articles, I upgraded to 16K, which today is like a rounding error, right? That's smaller than an image on a web page, but that was 4 times as much memory as I had. And level 2 basic, which was it didn't have what, how, and sorry anymore, but it had quite a bit more to go. 23 error codes. You remember exactly the number. Okay, that's great.
I was a level 1 user, I know that.
Okay, I don't remember as much as you. So anyway, up to that time, all my programs have been pretty small. But I was really impressed by, games that were out there in particular, right? Those were the big projects that someone like me going to hobbyist groups and stuff like that would be exposed to. And I was kind of gradually studying them to try to figure out how could they possibly make this thing so fast? How could they draw lines? How could they detect collisions in their spaceships? The games were kind of fun, but thinking about how they actually worked was really the most exciting thing. Games like these from Big Five Software were the biggest inspiration of all. There were a lot of great games out for the TRS-80, but I always thought that Big Fives were just the best of the best. And so I really studied them to try to figure out what they were doing. So one day, my friend Tommy, who knew nothing about programming, dropped by the house, and he said, well, why don't you write a video game? And I thought, that's insane. I can't do that. I don't know very much. But he didn't know anything about programming, so he didn't realize it was going to be a big task. And he encouraged me, and so I kind of got started on it. Before that, I did what any programmer does when, not given a project by someone else. I started writing programmer tools, but he got me going on a game. So let's see. I'll start by showing, Editor Assembler Plus. So I went out and bought a copy of TRS-80 Editor Assembler Plus from Microsoft, this company that would later affect us in much larger ways. But this is the manual, the quick start guide. It's a little bit scrolled off the screen, but the cassette tape that it came in, the little the case that it came in, and the bottom right-hand corner is a little error addendum to the manual saying, well, we're actually, IX with no plus 0 doesn't work, so please use IX plus 0. Anyway, I started with that, and then there's a great book. Someone told me there's a copy floating around here it's a powder blue book on Z80 programming for the TRS-80 that was just absolutely a great resource. Back in those pre-internet days, there weren't that many ways to learn that kind of stuff, and it really helped. So I bought those two, and I started working on the game. So, in fact, I started on July 11th, 1981. For some reason, I wrote this down on a little. I was in junior high school, right? So I'm writing outlines for papers, and right, you had to use 3x5 cards. So I had lots and lots of 3x5 cards. So I wrote July 11th, 1981. So I started designing what it should look like. So the idea was, unlike a lot of the games, like the Big Five games were awesome, but there was a theme to some of them at least that they kind of all derived from that original Space Invaders look, right? There was a block of ships that would come down and attack you, and they were roughly the same size, and they did roughly the same thing as each other. So I thought, well, let's try doing something completely different. Let's see if we can make every ship have a different pattern, different behavior. Some of them fly in formation. Some of them take 2 shots to die. Some of them aren't even ships. Let's see. So here I'm sketching out all of the ships in the game. And I don't know if you guys remember these old TRS-80 worksheets, but I actually went out and spent the money to buy a pack of those things and doled them out. Are there some of those available? That's great. Yeah. So here are each of the ships that will attack you. Some of them fly in formation. So if you look like at this one in the upper left-hand corner, they all fly across as a unit. You have to try to hit each piece of it individually. This is a little flying saucer that was inspired by one of the ones I saw in other Big Five games. This one actually has a sort of tractor-trailer configuration. This one here flies straight down at you as a unit, and then the pieces break off and attack you from the sides. And then this guy actually drops you down at the beginning of the game, right in the middle of the screen. So it's kind of like a mothership. And then like this one just pumps firepower at you as fast as it can. And then this is the Cloud, which isn't even a spaceship, but it comes after you and it just tries to ram you. Its goal is to ram you, and it frustrates you because you can only kill it by hitting it twice. So this is the general idea of the game being worked out. Let's see if I'm leaving anything out here. Yeah, so that's kind of what made it weird. And then, this is back in the day when, again, I only had cassette. I didn't keep any notes on the computer. Today, my handwriting's terrible because everything I do, I type into the computer or into the phone, right? Back then, handwritten notes by pencil were the only way to go because loading something from tape was going to take me 30 minutes, right? Here are all the notes on the ships. So, I showed you that beginning with the Weerd written out in cursive. So this gives you a flavor for what programming was like back in those days, right? There's just a lot of tedium and a lot of manual work. There's some of it still today, but wow, was it true back then. So I used another one of those worksheets, drew out the word Weerd in cursive, and then hand transcribed each one of those points into a pair, like 624, 525, 526 of points that would be drawn one by one on the screen as the splash screen started. This is only 5% of the lines just for that one thing. There were 440 lines, 440 points in that thing. And then just to give you a feel for what does Tandy Assembly language code, probably a lot of you know what it looks like already, but here I am working on Editor Assembler Plus, which limits you, I think, to 6-letter identifiers, right? So they're really short. And I had a 16K machine, so I couldn't fit comments into my code. So there were no comments whatsoever. And so we have identifiers like I1 and LT1 and stuff like that. So if I were to go back today, I have to actually say thank you to Ira Goldklang of TRS-80.com because I actually had one diskette that my friend Andrew had saved of my code for Weerd, and he revived it and sent me an extract of it. So these are actual extracts from the real code for Weerd. But yeah, if I were to try to figure this out today, I would be reverse engineering my own code. Here, occasionally, you can see that there are some names that make some sort of sense in the code. So you'd have some idea. So like, this is the ship that has eyes. This is ship 2, ship 3, ship 4, ship 5. This is an ugly ship and a drop ship. documentation by naming, right? And very short naming. Yeah, I have stories about that from other places, but here in particular, it was really tight. It was really tight. So what's funny is after all that design of the ships and how they were going to perform and so on, the thing I wrote first was the Weerd screen. For some reason, I've heard a lot of people say this too. They work on the splash screen of their game first, and then they actually write the real game. Seems completely backwards, but that was the way it was. And just a really super quick tutorial in Z80 assembly language programming. So this is a routine that comes out of Weerd that just displays a message on the screen somewhere. And this is from, back in the day when there was just no abstraction, no libraries, no nothing. So when you want to write on the screen, you know the actual memory address where you're going to write those bytes, right? So what this routine does is it says, I expect the HL register, which is a 16-bit register, to point to a place in memory where the text for the message is. I'm going to look and see if it's got an @ sign, because I'm going to assume an @ sign means the end of the message. If it does, I'm done. Otherwise, DE is the destination on the screen of where I'm going to put the message. So I put it there, load it into that location, then I bump both pointers and keep going. So the message just gets copied to the screen directly. There's nothing, it's as simple as it could possibly get. And then here's an example, right? Here's some messages defined. Def M is def message, def B is def byte. So you just define a message and then end it with an @ sign. Here we are, we clear the screen. I'm not sure why I'm loading 25 into count, but you get the, you get the message here, and you get the destination on the screen. You call message, and there it goes. So there's a library for a TRS-80 Model I. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything out interesting here. So I have to say, this code, I was not a good typist at the time, but boy, could I type Z80 instructions fast. It's a really simple instruction set, so I just have this visceral memory of just typing these things in. It's just kind of fun to think about. Okay, I explained that. Oh yeah, I should show you what it's like. Probably a lot of people have used BASIC and have used the editor assembler, but just as a reminder, in the modern world, we don't use line editors. We typically use screen editors. But the TRS-80 was from back in the day when people were still used to using punch cards, right, and printed line terminals. So all of the editing programs, even when you had a screen, were oriented around editing lines one at a time. So let me just show you what that looks like. So this, by the way, thank you to Philip and George, who are in the front row, for their TRS-80 emulator. This is running on a Linux machine using the Wine emulator for Windows, using their emulator to emulate a TRS-80. And all this, by the way, is being done in an emulator that's got a disk drive, which I didn't have any of that fancy stuff. So yeah, here's the source for Weerd. And if I type edit as in plus, I can start the editor assembler. And I didn't put it in super fast mode, so it's accurately taking a while. Okay, and then like to load code in, you'd say LD for load from disk, I think LD. MWDD/ASM is one of my source code files, and it's on drive 2. Love that blinking cursor. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3. Okay, so yeah, here's the beginning of one module of the code. And just so you can see what it's like to edit a line, right? So it had a very nice feature where if you hit the down arrow, it would actually look kind of like a screen editor. But if I hit the up arrow, right, the numbers are going up or sorry, the numbers are getting smaller and smaller, so my code is actually going backwards so it's not really a screen editor at all. And if I want to edit a line like this last line here, and for example, add a comment, so it's going to put me at the beginning, and I hit the space bar to see what is already there. I think there was an X command to add something directly to the end. I think I can hit I now. Yeah, and comment. Okay, and now if we hit up arrow and down arrow again, our comment went in, right? So this is what it was like to edit code on here. It was a lot like BASIC, but it's kind of amazing to me to look back and see that even with a screen, we didn't really treat it like we do today. Okay, so I didn't have enough room for both the editor assembler and all my code. So one of the tricks was to quash, as they used to say, the debugger, because I couldn't use the debugger anyway. That saved me a little bit of room. And then if you wanted to assemble, you could say assemble, and sure enough, it will take all those lines of instructions and write out a binary file called foo command on drive 2. I won't make you guys watch the whole thing, but just to get a flavor for what it looks like. Here it goes. 1,000. 2, 1,000. Yeah, next time I do a demo, I've got to turn the emulators up to full speed. Come on.
Go to the kitchen and get a drink.
Yeah, that's right. You can hear the disk drive whirring, can't you? Okay, so yeah, so you can see the instructions being compiled right there. That second column, those are the opcodes or some of the binary data. All right, that's probably enough. Anyway, yeah, that's the general idea of what it looked like. I have a recording of it. So this was my nemesis. I'm sure you all have the experience, and in particular, that was my nemesis. So, I mean, oh, God. Yeah, well, I never really did manage to do that. Yeah, so I kind of want to remind everyone what it was like to code on one of these things back in the day. So first, this is the loop that you would go through in your head while you're writing code, right? So first, you sketch out some code on paper because you can't put it on the computer. There's no way to really do that. It's just too slow. So here's an example of writing code out on paper in detail in pencil. I don't know why I always used pencil, but that's what I was using at school. So yeah, you sketch out some code on paper, like some new idea that you're going to do. You load Microsoft Editor Assembler from tape, which takes a long time. And it might not even work, even though it's like a professionally recorded tape. So you do it again. You load one segment of the source code from tape. That fails. So you adjust the volume and you go back, you try again. If it fails too many times, then you literally listen to the tape to hear the program and to hear the end of it, to get to the next copy that you saved, because you knew that it was probably not going to work the first time, and you try to load that copy. And eventually, it works. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. So you work for a while, you make some changes to the code, you rewind the cassette tape. Maybe you switch tapes because you should have a backup, right? Otherwise, you might write over your only copy of your code and lose it forever. You write one copy of the source code. You write a second copy of the source code so that next time when the loading fails, you're all right. Yeah, so that's what it was like. So yeah, I kept trying to drive to buy these high quality Chrome tapes. I don't know if you guys remember those, and they didn't really seem to work. I bought the Radio Shack cassette tape head cleaning kit with the little alcohol swabs. That didn't work either. It was just always a task. So yeah, before I mention Instant Assembler, I'll say Weerd was. So I had a 16K TRS-80 Model I. So if I wanted to write, something complicated, it was going to take the full 16K. Well, but I can't have the editor assembler in memory with the 16K of source code at the same time. There's not enough room for both. So I had to divide the program into 3 originally and eventually 5 segments, load each one in from tape, edit that, make changes, write that out, and then there are these 2 or 3 or 4 other segments, right, that have to be loaded. And there are jumps from one to the other, or references of each one to the other. So in order to make those correct, I have to load those segments in, make the changes to the addresses from the first one that I've written down on paper, write those back out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a change that really only was a few bytes long in one module could be an hour. It could be an hour long just to load them, make the change, make the updates to the other segments, et cetera. So it was a lot of work. And I'll say I'm still a programmer today. It kind of amazes me after going through all that I'm still a programmer today, but if I'm ever having any trouble with a modern system, I just kind of think back to the old TRS-80 Model I cassette days, and everything seems so smooth now. Yeah, I mean, we still screw up and waste a lot of time on other things, but yeah, there's nothing like slow, small memory, poor, unreliable I/O, like the old computers had, but there's also nothing like having total control of the machine, right? Modern machines are just not that way in general, unless you're an embedded programmer, right? You've got millions of lines of someone else's code running on the machine as well, instead of just yours. That's something very nice about the old TRS-80 days. Yeah, so let's see. Oh yeah, right. So let's assume that I've just finished going through and making these changes to all the segments. Now it's time to do some debugging. So the way that works is I've written out, like I showed you, you assemble to a file or to tape one segment of your program, right? Now it's time to debug, so you go load each segment into memory manually one by one and then jump to the start of it and you watch. And you see if the program works or if it does what you want and maybe what you want changes, right? In any case, or it crashes. Now you have to start that whole loop over again. And there was no debugger because there's not enough room to fit a debugger in memory. So at one point I read about this thing called instant assembler, and I actually bought a copy. An instant assembler said, well, you can actually run code in RAM and debug it in RAM, and you don't have to actually write it out in order to make a change. But it turned out that even then it was too big to fit in memory with the source code, so I had to give up on that as well. Yeah, okay. So 16K of RAM. There's not really much to say about that other than that that's really, really, really not much memory. I would tweak the code to try to make it fit into less and less space, to make it faster, but wow, 16K is a small amount of memory. Eventually, the disk version of Weerd was a 48K binary. Mostly that was because of the voice data that the Big Five added in. But I didn't have access to a 48K machine, so that was just a pipe dream at the time. And then 1.774 megahertz. So, it's kind of funny, but I feel like I almost went mentally ill from just trying to from trying to optimize the code, right? You would spend so much time trying to get every single instruction pared down and limited so that the game would be fast. That eventually I found, like, when I'm walking to school, I'm trying to see how many steps it takes to get to the bus stop. And can I actually take a path that's a little bit different so that I have fewer steps, right? If I hadn't finished this 360 days after I started, I think I might have driven myself crazy. Speed was the biggest challenge, though, for Weerd. And in fact, if you read the reviews, people seem to like it, but if they ever made any particular criticism of the game, it was that it was a little bit slow. And that was despite a lot of effort. Okay, So anyway, after all that work, I finished the game, and let me show you what it looks like to run Weerd. Let's see. Right. Yeah, okay, I recorded it so I won't have to try to do a good job playing the game on the screen. All right, there's the splash screen. Then it'll flash up the direction screen really fast, but I skipped right past that when I was recording. So it beams you down, you get started. You have shields, but you only get to use for a little while in the game. I think you get to use them for 3 times, and they time out eventually. You can hide behind them, but the cloud can still get you. All right, let's try again. Okay, now here we are. You notice there are all these different types of ships. They're dropping in different ways. Some are flying in formation, then detaching. Some attack you directly, some indirectly. Some just kind of fly past, and you're trying to target them as they go. Oh. Okay, one more round. Let's try one more round here. Okay, here's a ship flying in formation. I got one. Oh, that's great. Okay. Missed. Got that one by accident. All right, now here's the ship that you have to get piece by piece. The original plan was if you actually hit the one at the back, it was going to kill you too. I decided that wasn't a good idea for gameplay. Okay, oh, good shot. And you're going to get boxed in. Nope? Okay. So, by the way, so you're, you see the flashing that happened? That tells you your shield's about to go. All right, we get boxed in. Now we're done. And, all right, yeah, because we get to put our name on the high score screen. So, so I don't remember when I got the idea that this should be for more than just me. But having soft side and C load and ADUS say yes to this kid sending in articles earlier probably gave me the idea. And I think at some point Big Five advertised for third-party games, but I'm not sure if that was before or after I sent mine in, because I don't remember seeing it before. In any case, I decided Big Five, they were the big guys. I wanted to publish this game. Let me send it to them and see what happens. And it was my first thing. I didn't think I'd had much chance, but I sent it in, and they said yes. And for some reason, I don't have a copy of the acceptance letter, but I do have a copy of the first letter saying I was going to get $1,000 advance, and holy moly, my head was exploding. Bill basically was going to send me a tristic, so I got to have my own tristic because I needed to adapt the game to be able to use the joystick, and also some code to stick voice in. So I can't take credit for the voice sound effects, the oh yeah, and that kind of stuff. That was a Bill Hogue library. Anyway, boy, you can imagine what a kid would feel like getting a letter like that. I was, holy moly. Yeah, it was a lot of money, and especially for me, that was a lot of money. It really did go. It did go far. Let's see. So here's an interesting thing. So, first of all, my parents saw these numbers, the $1,000 idea going around in the acceptance letter, and they said, okay, you need to talk to an attorney, because they sent me a contract to sign, right? Which was the right idea. So we went and talked to the attorney, and the attorney, as attorneys are wont to do, said, you need to make these changes to these paragraphs. So we made the change, sent them to Bill, and Bill actually said, okay. I was relieved that I didn't lose the contract as a result of that. So we signed it. So once again, the world was a very different place back then, right? Without the internet, which programmers now use to communicate in all kinds of ways. I was listening to someone talk about using GitHub, for example. There are all these different ways we communicate just sort of instantly and we coordinate with each other and so on over great distances, and it's no problem. Back then, it was snail mail. So when Bill wanted to tell me how to add their high score saving code or their voice code, he wrote by hand 7 pages of notes saying, here's where this routine is and here's where that routine is. You need to allocate 256 bytes for high scores in this place and so on. And here is where basically he wanted me to take all my modules, put them together into one, and then tell me the address of the end of the code in the disk version so that when I sent it back to him with all his code added in, he could add the data for the voice. So I actually got that going, sent it to him, and had never heard the sound effects other than my original simple sound effects in the game. He added them later, and then it wasn't until I got the actual copy of the printed game that I knew what it was going to sound like. Yeah, so 7 pages like this, right? Today, that's just mind-boggling to me. And it went by mail, by postal mail. Not a fax, just mail. This was voice and Tristic and high scores. I did if I remember right, I did the high score screen, but the actual saving was his code. Okay. Okay. And then they sent me the game. So, again, mind blown. I was a little bit surprised by the art. They changed artists with my game, and I guess because they were doing Miner 2049er for the Atari at the time. So it wasn't the hard sci-fi kind of game cover that they used to have that I loved so much. But it's still, someone actually, a professional artist painted this. That was mind-blowing to me. And it had my name on it, which was also incredible. And includes sound effects. I don't know if you saw that includes sound effects, right? Wow. So yeah, here are the instructions. Games, software used to come with instructions. And then the cassette tape, mounted in styrofoam with, the name on it. One side for the Model I, the other side for the Model 3. And there was a disc version as well. I don't have any of those copies anymore. And then, there's a little section in here, I'll magnify it, a special note about backups, which kind of spoke to me when I read it. And basically it says, you can make backups. We haven't put any copy protection in our games, but please don't just give them to all your friends. And I remembered how I got to see Galaxy Invasion and other games like that, and felt a little bit funny reading this little message. And so ever since then, I've been very, very careful not to randomly copy anyone else's work. I don't think I ever gave anyone a copy, but I certainly did benefit from other ones being given to me. And then here's the back. And I remember I showed you at the beginning when I first mentioned Big Five, this thing at the bottom right here, which advertises all their other games. And so seeing that on the back of my game was also just an amazing thing to me. I just couldn't believe it. Okay. If I left out anything. Okay. Yes. Right. So back to the attorney. The attorney at one point sent me a letter. He said, I've just been thinking about you, and this article showed up in Time magazine recently. And isn't that amazing? Here's this guy, Mitch Kapoor. He's the guy who wrote Lotus 1, 2, 3, right? So he was already very, very well-to-do on 1, 2, 3. And then here's this kid who I'd never heard of. One guy is 29 years old. There was another 15-year-old kid who was making $2,000 a week on his programming. And it really kind of, I had not written this thing as a way of making money, but when I sent it in and I started getting money for it, I started having these ambitions, and this lawyer sending me this note saying, hey, you might make even more money. Got my naive, 15-year-old ambitions and expectations way, way, way up. Well, something happened around that time. It actually happened before roughly around the time I started writing Weerd, and it changed the way the world was. And in particular, it changed the way the other microcomputers would experience the world. And it was the advent of the IBM PC, the original IBM PC. So, people were just switching in droves to the PC. For whatever reason, we've talked about it before, right? Why Radio Shack didn't win, or Apple at the time didn't win. But for whatever reason, the PC was going to be the future. It was becoming increasingly clear. So from December 82 till about June 83, I earned a few $100 a month in commissions. I had a 15% rate with Big Five, and that was pretty exciting, and it felt like a huge amount. But about July, the numbers started dropping, and they dropped pretty much to zero with a few blips over the next few months until, let's see if I have it on the notes here. January 1984, I got a letter from Bill Hogue at Big Five saying they're dropping Weerd. That was really hard. I had months to prepare because, I wasn't making as much money as before, but still. So I called Bill on the phone. It was like, I think the second time I ever actually spoke to him. And I said, can you, just tell me more? And he said, yeah, if we hadn't moved into Minor 2049er and Atari games and stuff like that, we'd just be out of business. And I don't actually know how much longer they stayed in business after that. Their website doesn't say. Yeah. So that was hard, and it was kind of the end of an era for me. And when I go back through my records and look at, how much I made, this ambitious, naive guy with all these expectations about profits from his TRS-80 game, basically half of it pre-tax went to the lawyer. And that was after we negotiated his rate down. My dad did. So that was kind of tough. It was still the right thing to do to call the lawyer, but wow. So I still have a soft spot in my heart for the TRS-80, and I still remember the code that I used to write. Oh, but before that, I forgot one other thing. So I did write a few more things. My friend Andrew, who's the guy who helped me get the disk version working, because he had a disk TRS-80, he and I did a pair programming session, and we wrote this game for 80 Micro called Knockout, which was a breakout game, except you had paddles on both sides. And that's the listing that I showed at the very beginning of the talk as an example listing from a magazine. It was just a very short article. And you can see this is one of several pages that people would be expected to type in. So that was fun, and that was $100 or something like that that we shared. But eventually it was, eventually that was going to be the end for me. So I still remember this program I used to type in every time I went to a Radio Shack store. Let's see, is it going to cooperate? No, it's not. Okay, we'll run the emulator. Yeah. I'll bet you some other people in the audience are going to know what the program's going to do before I finish. For x equals 15360 to 16383, hook x 191, next. Okay. Yeah. So I used to do this at every Radio Shack store. It's still in my fingertips after all these years, but that's kind of the end of the TRS-80 era for me. Kind of represents it. But I want to say one more thanks, to Peter and George Phillips for writing their emulators, because if you go right now to my personal website, I haven't updated the website in many years, so it's otherwise out of date. But if you go to speechcode.com/weerd, let's just go to it this way. There we are. Oh, I have to put a trailing slash. So through the miracles of emulation, this is Weerd running in JavaScript in a web browser. So you can play it now wherever you are. Peter and George just told me that they are about to release a new version that does sound. And I'm really excited to get this going on the webpage. Right now it's silent. But yeah, so you can take a step back in time and run Weerd if you were ever interested in running it, even today. So thank you all very much for letting me take this trip down memory lane. And thanks. And if you have any questions, please.
Did you then write anything for the PC to sell commercially?
So it happened to be the case that PC Magazine started a technical spin-off magazine called PC Tech Journal, and the editor refused to move to New York. He was a Baltimorean, and I got a job working there. So I ended up writing directly for the magazine. It was actually fantastic, right? It was like Christmas all the time, as our previous speaker was talking about. Everybody sent PC Tech Journal everything they made, software and hardware. So I got to learn APL. I got to try every printer. Every multifunction expansion, memory expansion board for the PC came to us, and I got to rip my hands raw, pulling them out of the sockets in the PC. So I did a bunch of that. And actually, I actually have a Coco story. So my friend Doug, his father ran a company that decorated shopping centers for Christmas. And somehow we persuaded him that we could write one of these shopping center directories that would be a computerized shopping center directory. So we got a color computer because that was the thing back then. And we got, I think we did it in Forth, the programming language Forth, if I remember. I was infatuated with the language at the time. So, and we actually bought one of these big, arcade game units and got the right switches and everything, and got an interface to hook them into the Coco. It would show a map of the mall. You had a splash screen and stuff like that, and you could navigate around, and it would show you, what mall, what store was in what place, and that kind of thing. We only ever did it at one mall, and the lady who ran that mall never liked it, so that business didn't really go anywhere. But it was a ton of fun. So I did that as well. Yeah.
I've always wondered, how do you get the speech data into the game? Like, is it some sort of digital sampling process?
I'm sure it was sampled. It's definitely not a more sophisticated synthesizer. The thing about that is that, again, I only had this. Eventually, I didn't mention, I did use some of the profits to buy a 48K expansion. So I did have 48K after I finished Weerd. So, but in any case, Weerd itself would fit in 16K, except for the voice data. So when I shipped it off to them, to Bill, he inserted the data himself. So I don't actually know how he got it, but you can hear from the sound of it that it's sampled. It's not synthesized.
Yeah, I always knew it was sampled. I just wondered what the process is.
Yeah, I suspect generally. I mean, it takes very little memory, so it's going to have a lot of noise in it already. But I suspect he just hooked something up to his cassette port and digitized it that way, right? But I don't know. I mean, maybe someone here has a device that will take audio's input to a TRS-80.
I wonder if the box allowed that.
I don't know. I've never. Do you have one? Do you have a Voxbox?
I do.
I think you can read from the cassette, right? That's what you do when you're loading from it. So I think really you just hook up a microphone, get a program which is sampling at a certain rate, and just talk into it, and just keep repeating it till you get a good result.
Yeah.
I tried it once and it kind of worked, but never as good as the.
Set the volume exactly right. Yeah. That's right. We've got to get him to come. I really would love to meet him in person for one thing. Does anyone else have a question? All right, well, thank you all very much. This was a real pleasure.